Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Grab your stool. I'm pretty sure we don't have any good martinis again today. You could certainly claim these are three crazies. I think the first one's bad. I'll leave the other two as definitely crazy. Jim, we do want to start today. And again, we're not the deepest Anglophiles on the planet and certainly not monarchists, but it is the birthday of Queen Elizabeth II. She's 94, been on the throne since 1952. Her first prime minister was Winston Churchill. So let that sink in. You know, everybody's making sacrifices at this moment in time because the social distancing, the not wanting to put anybody at risk with the coronavirus and so forth. So the Queen has graciously canceled the gun salute for her birthday, Jim. So I know everybody's making sacrifices these days, and it's good to see the Queen's doing the same.
You know, Greg, even more graciously, she has said that the gun salute should not be aimed at Meghan Markle. She did ask a celebrity guest to give some coronavirus quarantine greetings to Markle. My understanding is that the Queen asked for former baseball great Reggie Jackson to stop by. It's an odd choice, but I guess those who have studied 1980s cinema, they recognize the significance of that.
Was the now deceased actor Ricardo Montalban anyway involved with
or perhaps Reggie Jackson? Yes, you know.
Oh, man. Well, the good news is for the Queen, first of all, Jim, apparently there's two birthdays for the monarch in England for some reason. There's the real date, and then there's the official day of celebration. So that's one other good reason to separate from the crown. Nobody deserves two birthdays. While it's nice, it's certainly not necessary. And the other good news is, you know, you think, oh, well, she's 94. How many more gun salutes is she going to get? Given how well she seems to be doing health-wise, probably about 15 or 20 is my guess.
Yeah, you know, it's real. We had talked about her address to the country, really into the world, you know, a little while ago, and it's, you know, you're dealing with an astonishingly long-lasting monarch when she can think of this as like the fifth or sixth worst thing that's happened in her reign. I haven't dealt with anything like this since the Blitz, you know.
I remember when I gave this speech 80 years ago. That still boggles the mind. But Jim, my favorite Queen Elizabeth reference today was maybe we can make a vaccine out of whatever antibodies Queen Elizabeth and Keith Richards are carrying around because apparently they're indestructible. So,
I mean, by the way, just observe the day Keith Richards dies is the one we all feel unbelievably mortal and vulnerable.
No one's going to believe it. Everybody's going to think it's the Onion or the Babylon Bee. But everybody's time comes eventually. But I don't think it's going to be anytime soon for the Queen. But we'll see. Jim, let's go to what I think is a bad martini, clearly. Yesterday, one of our crazy martinis, and could have been bad, was the plummeting oil market. When we originally recorded, it was like at $11, and then it was $8. And then by the time I posted it, I changed one sentence in there because it was down to $1. And by the time I actually put it on social media, it was minus 40 for May. And then fortunately, going out a little bit more into June and July, the prices were a little better. But even if you don't like the fossil fuel industry, it's probably not the best time to gloat. And so AOC goes on Twitter. She responds to a tweet that says, oil prices now at negative values, meaning oil producers have to pay people to take it off their hands and store it because when demand plunges like now, that is less expensive for them than building more storage. And AOC responds to that by saying, you absolutely love to see it. This, along with record low interest rates, means it's the right time for a worker-led mass investment in green infrastructure to save our planet. And she puts cough between two asterisks. I'm not sure what that's about. So, Jim, heartless is one word that comes to mind, and really bad at math is another one, given that we now have a fully stocked oil supply at dirt cheap prices. So which is more ludicrous coming from AOC right now?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing was she's like, this is the time to invest in alternative energy. Wait a minute. Oil's so cheap, they're paying you to hold on to it. I mean, this is the time to put all of our money in solar panels and other stuff. So there's the economic aspect that doesn't make sense. The second is how anybody could take glee or happiness in the thought that possibility lots of people could be losing their jobs, that lots of people could be out of work. Businesses could go under, again, there's an empathy gap there that, look, even, there are publications I'm not a big fan of. It doesn't mean I necessarily want to see mass layoffs and see those publications go under. The next, kind of comparison, I think it's interesting. I was thinking about this just as we were getting ready to go on today, Greg, and it's that recognition that tie this and the lots of people will be out of work attitude initially expressed in that quickly deleted tweet by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the protests going on around the country against the various quarantine rules and restrictions and things like that. There are probably some schmoes out there who are like, you got to reopen the gym, man, or some rather less relevant, less life and death industries. But by and large, you see a lot of signs that say things like, I just want to work. I want my job back. I want to be able to reopen my business, right? I want to work. That's a rallying cry that should be able to get whatever your view on the particular wisdom of a particular restriction. At minimum, you should sympathize. At minimum, you should say, okay, that's not people asking for a handout. That's not laziness. That's not a sense of entitlement. That is saying, up until this virus came along, I had a good job. I had a way of supporting myself and my family. These government restrictions took that away. I want you to undo this. Right? This is a very understandable viewpoint for people to have. And yet, the general tone, not just from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but most left of center commentators, is that these people are loons, these people are nuts, these people are deranged rednecks and reckless and all this kind of stuff. This is just an observation. Like, Greg, if you listen to the progressives, they're totally convinced that they're on the side of working people, but they act like they've never met any. In the sense that, like, here are actual working people saying, I want to go back to work. And they're getting this snotty derision and mockery and sneering and all that kind of stuff. So, it just is. The fact that she deleted the tweet means she recognized how bad this was to say, and how you're not supposed to say these sorts of things out loud, and you're not supposed to take glee in the misfortune and hardship of others. But I think if there's any silver lining to this bad martini, I think it's revealing. I think this indicates that there is I'm actually a little bit surprised that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the factor she is in Democratic politics today. I think after seeing her endorsement of Bernie Sanders, then watching Bernie Sanders crash and burn in the 2020 primary, I think you can kind of wonder, maybe she isn't the voice of the new generation that a lot of Democrats seem to think that she is. But that is, I think she simply cannot see the world as many other people do. I think she can't articulate her arguments in a way that does so. I think she just has this, arrogant combativeness that is her default setting for all of these issues that she encounters. And as a result of that, she's going to end up being a very unpersuasive figure on the national stage, in part because when things like this happen, that's how she reacts.
So, Jim, in looking at this, it seems like there is a partisan divide, or maybe that's just how the media would like us to believe, on the reopen versus hunker down longer debate. And to some extent, it's exacerbated by the fact you see Gadsden flags and Trump flags at some of these rallies to reopen. And so the question is, do you think that's accurate? And secondly, are we at a point now where even a crisis this deep, the partisan lines are not going to be blurred when it comes time to rally a country together?
Well, let's observe that the worst hit places in the country are cities, right? New York City, Detroit, northern New Jersey is technically suburban, but it's a fairly densely packed suburban area. New Orleans, although the news is looking a little bit better there. And generally, you find most big cities in this country to be heavily Democratic. Our partisan divide is in many ways a geographic divide, that you have Democrats in the cities and the inner ring suburbs, and you have Republicans in the outer ring, the exurbs, and the rural areas. And unsurprisingly, rural areas have fewer people in them. That's what makes them rural. That's, as a result of it, social distancing when your next neighbor is like a mile over on the next farm, it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit, cities and rural areas are going to have different, incidences of rates of infection, but the kinds of rules that are necessary in an urban area may not be so necessary in a rural area. You're not living right on top of each other. You're not all using mass transit. As a lot of people are starting to really strongly suspect, the subway system in New York City is the single biggest factor of why they have so many more cases than everybody else. Well, if you're in a rural area that doesn't have a subway, then you're probably going to be fine. And maybe you don't need so many restrictions on your life. So it's one of those things where I'm not surprised it's breaking down this way. It's one of the reasons it's kind of good to see things being handled at the state level. I look at the numbers in Georgia and I don't see the curve bent. I see the curve plateaued. It's not going down yet, and I think that's not 100% doing cartwheels of enthusiasm for Georgia lifting its restrictions as soon as it is. But also a flip side is that most urban hospitals at least have enough of a cash cushion to get through all this. Rural hospitals, because of the restrictions on elective procedures we talked about yesterday, they're at death's door metaphorically and financially. So it's not surprising that people who live in different geographical areas are going to have different responses to, oh my goodness, these restrictions are absolutely necessary. Look at how many people are dying. Versus, wait, nobody in my community has died yet. We've only got 1 or 2 cases. Why am I being asked to stay in my home like I live in an apartment in New York City when I live in the middle of South Dakota or North Dakota or Colorado or North Carolina or wherever it is?
There's a definite divide in different conditions in different places. You mentioned the hotspots, and other places have basically shut down for, in some cases, a few dozen confirmed cases of COVID, probably more that are asymptomatic. But different circumstances require different responses. So let's move from socialism to communism now, Jim, as we go to our first crazy martini. And last night, CNN coming out with this from their CNN International Twitter account. Breaking: the U.S. is monitoring intelligence that North Korean leader Kim Jong Un is in grave danger after surgery, according to a U.S. official. Then we have Katie Tur over at MSNBC tweeting out just a short time later, North Korean leader Kim Jong Un is brain dead, according to 2 U.S. officials. He recently had cardiac surgery and slipped into a coma, according to 1 U.S. current and 1 former U.S. official. NBC News confirms and adds to the CNN scoop from me and a couple other people that she tags there. And so then a lot of people reacting to that, wondering what the Washington Post headline's going to be. There is, in fact, a Kim Jong Un obit soon. But then, Jim, miraculously, we have a different response. And Reuters gets South Korean government officials to say this. South Korea government source tells Reuters reports of North Korea's Kim's grave illness was untrue. So, Jim, 2 thoughts come to mind here. You and I think are both old enough to remember the early 80s when Brezhnev was not seen in public for a while, and there were rumors going around that he's very sick and possibly on the brink of death. And, of course, the Kremlin's response was, it's just a cold. He's going to be fine for weeks on end. And then, actually he died. Then we had that with a couple more Soviet leaders as well. Kim Jong Un was not seen at the recent event, I think honoring his grandfather's birthday. And so now these rumors are flying. And so Katie Tur ended up deleting that tweet, said she needed to wait for more information. And now this morning, it's like none of this ever happened, Jim. So either this is the worst intel ever or something else is going on. What's going on?
Well, so I'm going to give one half-hearted defense of Katie Tur. And that is that, Greg, metaphorically, you could say he's brain dead. If you're saying, oh, yeah, guys, that guy's brain dead, okay, fine. Yeah. But, clinically and medically, no, probably not. Look, it is hard to report on what's going on inside a dictatorship in the world's most secretive society. That having been said, I like to repeat this anecdote of, it was, 1999, 2000 or so. I was working at a .com. Somebody in our office heard a rumor that Saddam Hussein had either just been assassinated or just died of some kind. So I started calling around to every Iraq-watching defense think tank type guy I can reach, and they say, look, this is and a very smart guy, who unfortunately his name escapes me, I can't remember, but yeah, I won't forget what he said, was like, when something like this happens in a closed society, our intelligence communities, all the people who are watching through satellites and spies and all that kind of stuff, they may not know exactly what happens or what happened, but they know that something is happening, right? You see defense units go on alert. You see people moving around. You see people reacting to whatever this big, unexpected, dramatic event was. And so even though you may not know exactly what they're reacting to, you do know that they are something has changed. Something has disrupted the regular routine. Now, look, when Kim Jong Un does not appear for a event he usually would appear at, that's probably something worth raising your eyebrows about. Clearly, this is something that is on the radar screen of U.S. intelligence. But the fact that South Korea is saying, yeah, we don't think this is the case, the fact that China is saying we don't think this is the case, chances are this isn't the sort of thing they'd be able to keep quiet for too long. Too many people would be reacting in a way. And as I said in today's Morning Jolt, in a rare, this is give you an example of just what a crazy state the world is in. I actually felt a little bit of relief at hearing that Rocket Man had not yet kicked the bucket, because the last thing we need is a struggle for power and secession in a country that's got a nuclear weapon right now. Not a fan of Kim Jong Un, but I would just rather not, see some sort of terrible civil war ending with Dennis Rodman ruling the country or something like that. As much as I'm enjoying make it a fascinating part 11 of The Last Dance, the post note of Kim Jong Un passing secession to Dennis Rodman. All in all, look, yes, it's hard to report on what's going on in North Korea. It sounds like CNN and Katie Tur of MSNBC and other folks probably should have been a little more cautious. I don't doubt their sources were saying that, but no doubt there are lots of folks who hate the North Korean regime who would like to spread this kind of message around just to stir up confusion and all that kind of stuff. So, 50 lashes with a wet noodle, not good. Should have double checked it. Should have been more cautious in how they worded it, but not enormously shocked that you could end up having sketchy reports coming out of North Korea that don't pan out.
So this is a little bit different, Jim, but I remember you saying during all the supposed Russia scoops, some of which turned out to be very much not true, where you would say things like, when it turns out not to be true, maybe you should either not trust the source again, or perhaps even burn the source publicly if it happens, certainly more than once. So is this a little bit different because it's a closed society, or do you have to encourage these reporters to make sure you've got at least one, if not two other sources the next time this person gives you something juicy?
I was going to say, you'd like to think that at minimum you have a mental note to be a little more cautious when you hear this. I would say my suspicion is that this report probably came from some sort of North Korean exile groups based out of South Korea. I don't know that for certain, but those are the folks who would seem to have the best sources within the country, the most likely to get a message through, et cetera. I do note one of the reports did mention U.S. Government sources. Again, since we don't have a satellite looking at Kim Jong Un all the time, let's also note Kim Jong Un. Look, there are not a lot of people in this world that I can make fun of for being fat. Kim Jong Un is one of them. So, and we got a coronavirus going around, right? It's very bad if you're obese to, be fighting the coronavirus. So the idea of Kim Jong Un kicking the bucket at a time like this, not the craziest thought. That is the state of things. Look, yes, they probably should be more careful, but again, the alternative is, you're getting information from sources like this that may or may not know what they're talking about, or no information coming out of North Korea at all.
Jim, if Dennis Rodman somehow did become the new leader of North Korea, would that even crack the top 5 of weird things that happened in 2020?
It's a high bar. Probably. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's kind of early in the year, but you like to think that even it's only marginally crazier than Trump becoming president.
All right, on to our final crazy martini now, Jim. And speaking of presidential campaigns, Joe Biden is out there openly wishing that Michelle Obama would be his running mate. He claims, though, that he doesn't think she really wants to be back in the White House and have that sort of attention. He thinks she kind of likes being a private citizen again, but I think he still kind of wishes that she would be the running mate. That's who he seems to be very clear his preference is, but he says it will be a female running mate. And one of the names that, of course, keeps coming up is former Georgia state lawmaker Stacey Abrams. She, of course, ran for governor in 2018. She lost. She didn't really ever admit that she lost, but she admitted that she's not going to be the next governor. She's being talked about in the media. And she was on CBS this morning with Gayle King today. And Gayle King said, so what makes you a good possibility to be Biden's running mate? And so she says, this is what qualifies her.
Why do you think that you'd be a good choice for Joe Biden?
Part of my response to not becoming governor in 2018 was not to hide my head, but to really work on addressing the core issues facing our country. I've set up a national 18-state infrastructure to protect our elections. I've set up a 7-state organization that is working on the census. And through the Southern Economic Advancement Project, I've been able to work with Propel, Fresh EBT, and get connected with Give Directly to address the economic needs of our most economically vulnerable and least resilient communities.
So she talks about running this whole, anti-voter suppression effort that she's got. Meanwhile, her campaign manager's out there saying that they had a revolutionary turnout in minority vote in 2018. So go figure. But then Gayle King says this.
Well, I just want to say this. That's a great nuts and bolts answer because everybody knows you're extremely qualified.
So there you go, Jim. This woman started an organization and she was a state lawmaker, and therefore she is extremely well qualified. It's not like the media is playing favorites here or anything, right?
Well, first of all, I guess, if you'd said, some version of, Ms. Abrams, aren't you tremendously underqualified for the presidency? That interview is going to get a lot more hostile real fast. So maybe this is just a matter of buttering up the person you're interviewing. But let's take a good look at this. If you're Joe Biden, what does Stacey Abrams get you that other candidates don't? I mean, she's a icon of the Twitter left, right? Did she put Georgia in play? I don't think that's the case. She didn't win it. She didn't win it in a really good year for Democrats. You think she's going to win it in a presidential level turnout in Georgia? I'm not so sure. She is very, very progressive. You probably couldn't run the entire Bernie Sanders playbook against her, but you could run a good chunk of it. We understand that, Biden did have conversations with her very early in this process. And there was already some speculation that in order to, dissuade all the rivals, Biden was going to name her early, and he clearly did not. You have to strongly suspect that his, cooler heads prevailed, and it would have seemed like a desperation move. The other thing is look, what got Joe Biden the Democratic nomination? Well, in most of these states, it was African Americans. So what does she add that he doesn't already have? I'm not so convinced that this is a massive, get for him that would bring in a lot of voters that he otherwise would. Should Democrats be worried about African American turnout and enthusiasm? I guess you could. It's probably safe to say that African Americans like Joe Biden, probably not as much as they like, Barack Obama, but that's a really high bar to clear. I don't know what she gets you, and I think that she is exactly the kind of person that the Trump campaign would love to run against, right? So you've got him being as aged as he is. I think if you've been watching his appearances from his basement in Delaware, he's not looking at his most articulate and sharp and all that stuff. This is a really important choice for Joe Biden. People need to be reassured by that. And so I don't know if a Stacey Abrams pick makes America say, okay, God forbid something happens to Joe Biden. We're in good hands. We're going to be great. Most Americans have no idea who Stacey Abrams is. She's never been elected to anything statewide. She's been, famous for insisting she won the Georgia governor's race when she lost by about 50,000 votes. Norm Coleman losing by a couple hundred up in Minnesota. Okay, I can understand that complaining. Al Gore. Okay, 537 votes in Florida. Yeah, that's a stinger of a loss. That's really 50,000 votes. That's not that close. This may be much ado over nothing, but this whole it's very interesting how much the folks on the left have convinced themselves that Stacey Abrams is this juggernaut that could clinch the race for Biden. When I think the evidence of that is slim and few and far between. And just kind of left scratching our head of, are the Democrats actually foolish enough to convince themselves into making the wrong decision in a circumstance that, look, unemployment's been very high. The suburban voters who abandoned the Democrats in 2018, there's very little indication they're going right. There's very little indication that those folks have come back, the suburban soccer moms, et cetera. But the argument of Republicans was that's okay because we're going to make up for it in white working class voters, the folks who carried those upper Midwest states for Trump back in 2016. Well, those white working class voters have very high unemployment rates right now. Now, maybe by fall things are better. Hopefully by fall things are better. But probably by fall things may not be back 100%. I don't know if they're in a great shape for 2020. Do you want to gamble all of that on Stacey Abrams, or do you want to go with somebody like Amy Klobuchar, who's probably a safer choice? There are a bunch of choices that get you everything Stacey Abrams gets you with none of the risks of Stacey Abrams.
Jim, can we do a Venn diagram on the people that think Stacey Abrams is a great VP choice with the people who thought Beto O'Rourke was a great presidential candidate idea?
Interesting. Yeah, there would be that. Also coupled by the people who again, I'd love to do the time machine for everybody who looked back at Sarah Palin, because at least she was a governor. At least she'd been running a state for a while. So, this is also the sense of, I'm sure if you look back, a lot of these people would have said that Mike Pence was terribly underqualified. And, who is this, corny guy from Indiana? Yeah.
On that note, Jim, I don't think it's going to be Stacey Abrams, but we'll see if he can coax Michelle Obama out of retirement. I don't think that's going to happen either, but it might. So have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your quarantine day, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a kind review. Get us on those home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. And please join us on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.